There can be no society without a shared memory of its history, where it has been, what are its core values and aspirations, who have been its architects. The Eminent Caribbean Jurist Awards was conceptualized in 2019 to recognize and celebrate those outstanding jurists who, by dint of their brilliance, hard work, and determination, have made a consequential contribution to Caribbean society. The 2021 installation of these awards pays homage to pioneering Caribbean women jurists who have built and are building the Caribbean society through their contributions to legal activism, adjudication, corporate governance, education, politics, and public service. These are women who have shattered glass ceilings and who have blazed an inspirational trail for the younger generation and indeed for all of us to follow.
Many of our outstanding women have served diligently away from the limelight and popular acclaim. Today, we recognize those who have given their careers to a life in public service.
Dame Justice Monica Joseph, a remarkable woman who served the people of Grenada and the wider Caribbean well. Dame Justice Monica Joseph has left an indelible mark on the landscape of the Eastern Caribbean. As a senior civil servant, she found her calling in law and rose quickly in the ranks. The first woman to attain the position of Solicitor General in St. Vincent, Dame Monica filled many offices and served the region with distinction. Even more remarkable was her dedication to public service throughout her career and even after retirement. Even today, she is held by her peers in high esteem.
Well, I came up from a family of police people. My father was a police officer. My uncles on both sides were police officers. My cousins on both sides were police officers. So I learned to look at things in a certain way, that people would put their trust in somebody they had brought up to behave in a certain way, which is to listen to people, to be guided by what you're taught, and to help people. My family believed in helping persons, and they passed that on to all of us.
Okay, I will first start by saying that what has impressed me most about her is her rounded personality. And I'm actually quoting from one of the lawyers who said, and I want to, well, this is in the, no wonder Monica made such an excellent judge. She has always been a rounded and balanced personality with a judicious blend of common sense, good humor, love, and discipline. That is what struck me about her, how well-rounded she was. She was involved in public service, well, in public life generally, and I think that brought a lot to bear on her performance as a judge and performance generally. In fact, even before she became a judge, she worked in the legal office and she climbed the ranks, until she became acting director of public prosecution or director of public prosecution. And from then she went on to be a judge.
I think I felt very good about it. And I was, of course, very surprised because I didn't expect anything like that. It just came out of the blue. One day I got a call from the judge who was then serving incidents, and he informed me that the Chief Justice had asked him to ask me if I would be prepared to join them on the bench. And I agreed to do that. And the next thing you know, I was appointed the first female judge to operate. I was very pleased, I was very honored, to say the least.
In looking at her, I paid a lot of attention to remarks made by lawyers in St. Vincent because she spent a lot of time in St. Vincent. And at the meeting, which was held when she was about to retire, it was pointed out that that was the first time the Bar Association had been so united. Everybody really showered praises on her. And they referred not only to her work among them in St. Vincent, but throughout the region. The president of the Bar Association said that she was known throughout the region for her hard work, for knowledge of the law, and above all for her honesty, fair play, and integrity. And, I think that is important to hear from people who had been working with her, throughout that time. So I paid quite a lot of attention to that. And well, apart from that, I think what is important is how the people in St. Vincent saw her, because she was so much involved in life in St. Vincent. And it started from Grenada when she was a young girl and was involved in guiding Netball Association. She was also involved in the eruption in 1979, and that was the first eruption since 1902. And she helped to coordinate the relief efforts. And, one person pointed out that sometimes she spent nights at the office without sleeping. So she played a very important role. And additionally, shortly after the eruption, we went into independence. And there again, she was on a committee preparing a souvenir for the independence. The efforts, being the first female Supreme Court judge in the OECS was important in itself. And I pointed out that this came some years after the International Year, Women's Year, and that people from the region would have been happy to have put a tick and said that we have, after all, appointed the first Supreme Court judge, a female. And I went on to say that it was not in deference to International Women's Year, but it was based on the work and personality of the individual itself.
From the north to the south, I served the OECS as best I could. And I must say that from the feedback that I'm getting, I feel people regarded me as somebody who was willing to learn still, even at my age, although I don't want you to look at my age, you must look at me. Yeah. But I'm happy that I see quite a number of young people becoming involved in the legal profession, and also in helping people around them. I was totally surprised, but pleased and highly honored that they would pause and recognize the little that I tried to do to help the people around me.
Her Excellency, Louise Michele Young's life and work reflect a woman championing change and the expanding world for women and society. As with the emergence of the first political party in Belize, Louise is credited with many groundbreaking achievements and firsts. She demonstrated a penchant for excellence during a time when women were just beginning to come into their own in Belize. As ambassador to the United Nations, Lois redirected her intellect, passion, and energy onto the world stage. With a bold career marked by service, she ensured that her impact has been local, national, regional, and even international.
I think I have the reputation in Belize. I hope I'm not wrong, but I think I have the reputation in Belize for being honest and straightforward, and for doing the best I can for people when I take on a job. I think that I have set that tone, that it's all about the service and the integrity of your service, and not about how much money you can make at all costs. That is not the end goal. And I think I have that reputation, and I hope people appreciate that. And that's what I want to leave.
Passionate and driven in anything she does. She doesn't do things half-heartedly. If she says she's going to do something, she'll do it to the best, thorough. She's very thorough. And even people that she's had challenges with in the past, because all of us, nobody likes everybody and everybody doesn't like everybody, right? Very few people would say they don't respect her. And I think that's what will live on, that she doesn't do things halfway, and she will commit, and you will know where she stands to a fault. And I can attest to that personally. I remember the very first office she had and where it was, and then the second office. And so it was built on her really being brave. There were no women lawyers practicing, particularly in public. Like I said in the bio, the only other lady lawyer was just a solicitor. She just worked in chambers. And so Lois had to do very visible cases. So she did a lot of criminal work, which, as you know, you spend more time in court, so people get to see you. And she was very good at it and very passionate about it. I don't think she slept a whole lot, because she's that kind of person, when she gets involved with something, she's on it all the time. But she took some high-profile criminal cases very early in her career, which helped boost her profile and hone her skills.
I did criminal law when I first came back a little bit, and I moved away from that pretty soon. I think it was opportunity. I didn't set out to do commercial law. It was just the opportunities that came my way, and I just got into it. I think more these days, a lot of the lawyers specialize in one direction or the other, but I didn't just do commercial law. I did other things as well, but primarily commercial, and it was pure happenstance. And I think it's one of the most fruitful, financially fruitful areas of law to practice in, and interesting as well. And even more so today, the law has developed so much commercially that it's unbelievable what is now the law.
Yeah, well, I think the basis of it, I mentioned in the bio that my mom worked in social work, and so we all sort of developed that affinity for that, and so that sort of service, I think Lois picked up on that quite a bit. And she took the same professionalism to these organizations and serving on these different boards, and at the high school, the junior college, and on the different boards she served on. Also very professional. I think she allowed her legal thought process to guide her through reasoning through the challenges that the organization may have been facing, and coming up with solutions. She doesn't beat around the bush a whole lot. I think that aided organizations stay on task and stay focused on what they were supposed to do. I think she took that ability to focus on what was important, which is what law trains you to do to a great deal, and apply that to what the organizations were trying to do when they can get scattered. When it's voluntary work, you can get scattered and want to do everything. I think she took that sort of laser focus organization and reasoning to the approach to solving problems.
There were lots of committees and things that I was on, but they all needed a legal basis, of course. So yes, I was involved in this community, and I actually was a member of the Association of Concerned Belizeans, which was an active group, and we were all activists, political activists, wanting to see good governance. And I still maintain that you absolutely need good governance as a starter for any country to get off the ground. It was essential to be a practicing attorney in order to effectively be involved in any of those committees that I was on or associations, because you've got to understand the issues properly. And basically, it's the law that underpins all the issues in our society. So you said you cannot discard the thread of the law. You've got to know the law, and it takes time to do those things. You've got to have energy and time. You also have to put yourself to one side a bit it's not about you. It's about the issue. It's about basically for everyone, fairness. All people want is to be treated fairly. And I always had that in my mind, even as a young girl. Fairness. There is nothing that spawns a dispute quicker than unfair treatment. We all want equity. We want to be treated fairly. And I used to bear that in mind in everything that I did. Fairness to the citizens of your country. Fairness in what you do in your personal life. You know, that stint at the UN, it was offered much earlier than when I took it. It was a great opportunity. You know what I realized, which if I hadn't realized it before, I certainly realized it when I went to the United Nations, which is that we small countries, we are essentially alone. And CARICOM needs to be CARICOM and stick together. You know, the European Union, they moved as a bloc at the UN, and so did the African Union, and so does it up to this day. So we in CARICOM, we need to stick together because essentially it's the developed countries forging ahead, and the developing countries like our islands and Belize, we have got to realize that whatever the developed countries do for us or help us with, it is really basically to further the agenda of those countries. Our interests are collateral, and our interests are only their interests when it furthers what their goals are. So the sooner we realize that and realize that there is no free lunch, the better for us. We have got to look out for ourselves.
I think she's as effective as she could be by her personal drive. Belize is a small country, and as you know, and not a lot of resources are available to foreign missions. And so I think she did what the best anybody could do, given the resources and given the size of the country. There had been some really good work done before in the diplomatic realm, because Belize has always depended on international relations and on diplomacy, because we have this Guatemalan territorial dispute with Guatemala, which is now at the International Court of Justice. That overshadowed most of our lives as people, kids growing up, and then as young adults. Belize only became independent in 1981, so we were already adults. We grew up in a colony. Going to that forum was a continuation for her, was a continuation of representing Belize and establishing Belize, which is something that we grew up struggling with, dealing with the Guatemalan problem. And so she kind of took that to the international forum as we continued to struggle with the problem. And it really culminated with the decision, which was done by a national referendum, to go to the International Court of Justice. So there will be no more direct negotiations between Belize and Guatemala. We would go to court. And she was the ambassador at the time when that was done under the previous administration. I mentioned in the bio about the building of the new capital of Belize. When it wasn't involved, climate change, started in the 60s. And then in 1971, the capital moved. And it moved because of weather, right? Because not weather, climate, hurricanes. That's why it moved. It's because Belize City, which is the largest metropolitan area in the country, is only 6 inches above sea level. I have known that from the time I've known myself, right? We were always very aware of that. And so I think that she would have recognized that and taken that passion. So even though we're a small country, use that part of our experience to drive what she was doing and identify with what was going on in different parts of the world.
We have got to look out for ourselves. Look, we have funded their wars. We have funded their development. And now we are the victims of their development where climate change is concerned. And yet it is the hardest thing to get the developed countries to take our difficulties, our aspirations, and our needs on seriously. They talk about cutting back on greenhouse gas emissions. We hardly admit we're certainly not responsible for where we are today.
Being honored in the region, I feel, and I know she feels that because she expressed her absolute joy and how humbled she was by this recognition. To be recognized in the region is significant. Again, it flows on from, I guess, this nationalistic regional integration feeling which we grew up with. Again, she could attest to it, and our generation could attest to it, that Belize's moving forward to independence was grounded internationally by Caribbean support, right? And so we feel as kinship. She has, as I said, she's been to the Caribbean Court of Justice herself, as I said in the bio. So she does recognize the importance and significance of this regional accolade, and I think she is much deserving of it.
The laws that govern our society emanate from the legislative process in our parliaments. We honor those women who have been stalwarts in that process.
Alix Boyd Knights, Speaker Emeritus, served as Speaker of the Commonwealth of Dominica's House of Assembly for a monumental 20 years. Her illustrious career in law and parliamentary affairs in Dominica and the wider Commonwealth was marked by her contribution as chair and member of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians, advocating for the rights of women and children and championing the passage of related legislation.
Life moves on and you move on, and you have to sort of get on board. For me, the defining moment of my transition from having a dream to be a lawyer to reality was when the University of the West Indies began offering what they call the Challenge Program. It was first the social sciences, and my recollection is that I was in St. Lucia at the time, and I enrolled. I understand at that time they were doing it in all the islands, and I can't remember what year, but it would have been in the 70s. And I recall being told that the 133 persons had enrolled, all the lecturers were enthusiastic. But at the end of the day, at the end of that academic year, only 2 persons wrote the exams, and I was one. Imba Charles and I, we wrote the sociology exam. Everybody else seemed to have dropped out. And I saw it as a means of testing whether my ability to learn was still there. And the results of the exam informed me that I was. And so I did another 2 courses. And then one day I was told by the resident tutor of the day that she had enrolled me in a class. And I said, but she just called me on the phone and she said she wants to see me. I said, look, I paid all my debts, She said it's nothing to do with debts. She had already even filled out the form because they were offering law, and she thought I'd be a good person to do law.
Well, regarding her personality, she is very multifaceted. And this, in fact, comes out of her family background and where she lived. Her family, one branch of it through her father, came from the distinguished, long-standing Boyd family, who held major positions in various aspects of Dominican life throughout history. So her father, for instance, was a member of the Legislative Council. That would lead her in to feeling comfortable with the House of Assembly. Her mother was also extremely multifaceted. She made cakes and baked, and also was a great gardener. And this, in fact, has come through to her as well, both of those aspects. And she was also born and brought up in the center of the capital of Dominica, in Roseau. And therefore, all of the major activities, particularly cultural things like carnival and all, would be passing right in front of her as a child. And growing up, she was participating in all of this. Her mother was very active as well. And through school, she was also linked to many of the other families who were participating in major social aspects of Dominica. So she was really very well grounded in all of these aspects that we think have formed her character and her personality as an adult. And the contributions that she has made over the years at present are all influenced by those linkages, both in politics, in community service, and also in creativity in terms of gardening and cooking and that kind of thing.
And then I applied to UE. By that time, the children were at university, my first two girls, and I had a little one as well, but she was with me. And then I got into UE in 1987. At that time, my eldest daughter was in her final year, and the other one was just starting engineering in Trinidad. So when 1987 rolled along and I had done very well in my exams, everybody did well in their exams, my mom passed away. And so I had to bring my baby daughter with me into my final year. We made it, and then I brought her to law school with me. We made it there too. And when I was writing my final bar exams, that is when my daughter was doing her common entrance. By the grace of God, we all got through very well. And when I was finished, I decided I wasn't going back to St. Lucia. I was going to go back to Dominica.
Well, I knew her from before she left for St. Lucia. I knew her as a young lady. And I knew her in St. Lucia for all her activities there. And then I was extremely surprised to hear that she moved on to law. And of course, the thing is that she found her niches at Cave Hill. Wherever she felt that she was of help and use in linking with even younger students, she would do so. So she didn't kind of force herself to try to be younger than she was. On her age level, she participated in things and assisted with things and gave guidance on a personal level. But at the same time, she had that the fortunate thing about being a mature student, which I myself was in my day. She was able to have the experience, a life experience, to be able to throw into her legal studies. And yes, it was peculiar, but she adapted to it, that one of her children was actually at university at the same time that she was. But it was this adaptability, and I think that this is one of the threads that runs through her life, that in regardless of what situation she is, whether it's a matter of age, whether it's a matter of being a woman, whether it's a matter of having, difficult challenges in personal life or whatever, she was always and still is extremely adaptable to change and to moving into new situations.
Immediately I got into Dominica as an attorney at law and got called to the bar and all of that, I began to see what was happening about the way women were. I don't know what happened between Miss Charles being the first woman prime minister and her leaving office and the UWP ascended into office. Somewhere along the way, the heady days of Miss Charles's tenure and how women felt about themselves had just almost dissipated, and first of all, I had to deal with the women. I had to go in there and let them know, look, you all have rights, you all can own property and all of this. And I also realized that there was a high incidence of child abuse as well, child sexual abuse and so on. And it came into my lap, so I just dealt with it. I went all over Dominica advocating for women. So you see, mine wasn't just sit in an office and go to court. I saw a lawyer's role. You learn so much about people's rights, the law, and how people can get over people who try to do one on them. And I felt I had to let people know, look, you have rights and you can do this and you can, and these are the steps that you can take and so on. I joined the DNCW, Dominica National Council of Women. But I have this perverse trick, if you want to call it that. I saw them as a group of tea and sympathy. Oh, man beating you. Oh, he'll get over it. Just pray. I said, no, fellas, we have to do more than pray. I introduced them to the Domestic Violence Act, and I fought my way through officialdom and everything else to get the domestic violence legislation at a cost almost to my life. Because Old Year's Night, I don't say that in any particular fora before, but it needs to be said. Old Year's Night, I was going to my home after midnight mass, and that was when the Domestic Violence Act was being debated in the House. We stopped for Old Year's and we had to continue after. And a few people who were aggrieved got people to stone my car on the pretext that I had stopped a dance happening next door. It was not anything about that. They stoned me, and every window and door and piece of glass in my vehicle thing, they stoned me for about 3 hours while I sat in my car.
Well, I think once again, she kind of set a niche for herself. She worked out where it was that she was going to apply her experience in a legal field. Actually, she opened her office. She rebuilt an old building in the middle of Roseau, just less than 200 yards from where she was born and brought up. And there she was in the central street of the capital at a main junction. And she realized that there were issues in society related to women and children, and the difficulty that women were having with their lives in terms of domestic violence, for instance, the struggles of making ends meet with the very limited requirements of the law put on men to give maintenance and support to their women for the support of their own children, who very often they ignored. And so she used the media that was available at the time, which was mainly, of course, the radio and our little television station, to basically bring this to the fore, and also to defend women actually in court and fight for them. So she decided that that was the role that she would play. That was the area that she would concentrate on. And it was extremely effective indeed, because she had a very kind of, you could almost say, volatile. I was going to use the word dynamic, but I think volatile is better. Like, you would not cross her path. And it was clear that if a woman was going to Alix Boyd Knights for assistance, that alone would send warning signals to the men who had mistreated them or had not given their full financial support and stuff like that. So by her personality alone, it was in a way a bell that was ringing to anybody who had transgressed in that field. And many women, of course, once the news went around, many women would go to her for help in this regard. She was not unaccustomed as a child growing up to links with parliament and politics, because her own father was a member of the Legislative Council in the 1950s, 40s, 50s. And therefore, she really moved, and she was moving in the circle of friends and associates that were tied in with this. And she was offered the post of Speaker of the House. Now, what is fortunate about Dominica is that women have always played a major part in politics in Dominica. The first woman to be a member of parliament in the whole of the Caribbean was in Dominica. And of course, the first Caribbean prime minister, a woman prime minister, was from Dominica. And the speakers before her, clerks of the House, there was also the path laid by women in Parliament in Dominica before she arrived. So the fact that she was a woman was not necessarily an issue. It was more her personality that she brought to the House. Very strict, very rigid, and in the early years of her speakership, she was assisted by a very distinguished a woman who had written a book about parliamentary procedure, who was a clerk of the House, who was a former Speaker of the House at the time of Dame Eugenia Charles. So she had this great guidance and anchoring there, and she continued on for 20 years. I mean, the thing is that she really raised a lot of hackles because of her strict behavior in the House and her no-nonsense attitude. And to the point where a number of calypsos at carnival time were made about her. There was one, for instance, that was very famous, likened the House of Assembly to an animal farm. And she was the crapaud, she was the frog for some reason. And that did not daunt her. She stood on the veranda of her office, which has in the center of town, and she watched the bands go, and people would be pointing at her and she'd be pointing back because of the fact that the calypso was representing and talking and singing about her pattern of administration within the House of Assembly. And sometimes people really felt she had gone too far, but it was all based on her belief that if you don't have order in the House of Assembly, mayhem will reign, particularly in the kind of pikong, mepui, as we say, politics of the day. So she had to be strong. You have to be strong to deal with this. And then on top of that, of course, she gained a great deal of recognition across the Commonwealth with all the female Commonwealth speakers and speakers generally. And she was always on trips as far as places like Tonga and Sri Lanka and these places, going to meetings. And she was recognized and loved by many of them around the world.
When I went to China, I was asked to be on the show of one of the top chefs in Beijing. And to my honor and pleasure, I was invited to cook something typical of Dominica. So I made the famous Creole dish, fish bouillon. So specific and particular way of cooking fish. And I also did shrimp in coconut milk. And needless to say, I work with my seasoning, because I wouldn't get my nice seasoning pepper and my thyme and all of these things there. So I worked with my seasoning.
The attitude that Dominicans have towards her is, of course, split. Because mainly along political lines, because of the fact that the opposition felt that she was unfair to them, whereas she was just basically trying to lay down the law. So there's a body of people that feel that her manner was too rough and uncalled for. But then she has this massive following who, in reflection, realized that in such a difficult space, and having to deal with such difficult and highly toxic politics, that you have to be firm. So I would say that now that the years have passed, she's out of the post, there is this lingering respect for her in that role as Speaker of the House. The manner in which she administered Parliament has left a legacy for any speaker who is going to follow, that they have got to ensure that there is a level of order and fairness in the House. And that would be her legacy. Because, of course, as a speaker, you cannot participate in debate. Although she did, and this was one objection, make her feelings known and her opinions felt within the House of Assembly, but she always did it in an advisory role on the bench as Speaker. And so that legacy that she will have left will be, one, a full respect for the Speaker, that you must understand that, okay, you know this person in a small community in another level, but that once they are sitting at that chair, there must be full respect. And that also anybody from any side of the House must ensure that their conduct is fitting with the regulations of the House. And so that would be, to me, her main legacy, what she has left.